Imagine you are faced with a decision you never thought possible. Your mother is seriously ill, and the only thing that can save her is a huge sum of money. You are desperate, with no other choice but to take a step that will change everything. What would you do? In such a situation, with your mother's life at stake, Jiang Nuan makes a decision that will change her life forever. She accepts the offer of a secret deal, one night with a cold and calculating CEO named Qin Muyuan, for 300,000. The price seems high, but what is the price of the life of a loved one? But what Jiang Nuan didn't know was that this one night would destroy not only her mother's life, but her own as well. What if this mistake wasn't just a one-time misunderstanding, but the beginning of something that would shatter her entire world? And what if the man she chose to take this step with is the CEO of a powerful company whose actions and decisions drag her into a whirlpool of pain and revenge? That's exactly what happens to Jiang Nuan. Her world collapses when, after her night with Qin Muyuan, she learns that her mother has died. But fate has another blow in store for her. She discovers she's pregnant by this very man. What follows is a path filled with pain, anger, and revenge. Her journey has only just begun, and she will do anything to make him accountable for what he did to her. Now I'll tell you the story of Jiang Nuan, a woman who never gives up despite everything she's been through. Jiang Nuan lived a life full of effort and pain. Every day was a struggle, a constant wrangling over how to pay the hospital bills for her critically ill mother. She worked day and night at various jobs, never allowing herself a break. Her mother was the only thing she had left, and Jiang Nuan loved her more than anything in the world. But despite all her efforts, money was always tight. The doctors had already told her there was only one solution, an expensive operation that could save her mother, but only if she could raise the necessary sum, an amount that Jiang Nuan could never have raised on her own. In this desperation, she heard about a businessman, a wealthy CEO who was supposedly always looking for unconventional ways to make money. His name was Qin Muyuan, and he was known for his coldness and calculation. But Jiang Nuan, finding herself in a desperate situation, had no other choice. A chance meeting with an acquaintance brought her into contact with him, and the opportunity to earn 300,000 seemed like the only solution. The decision she made was the hardest of her life. She knew this step would change her soul forever, but her mother's life depended on it. One night, the acquaintance said, is all you have to do. One night that would change her life forever in unforeseeable ways. Jiang Nuan felt a mixture of anger and despair. She knew the price was high, but she couldn't afford to let the opportunity slip away. That night, when she stood before Qin Muyuan, it wasn't just about the money. It was about the hope that she could save her mother, about the love and care she felt for her. But what Jiang Nuan didn't know was that that night would come with more than just a financial price. She would not only sell her heart and soul, but also put her future in the hands of a man who wielded more influence than she could have ever imagined. The moment she made the decision felt like a cold, hard blow. Her eyes filled with tears as she entered the room where her fate would be sealed. But she knew there was no other choice. She had done it, not for herself, but for the woman she had always loved. A decision she would never forget. But Jiang Nuan never expected that this decision would take her this far. The pain she felt at that moment was nothing compared to what lay ahead. What she didn't know at the time was that this step would not only lead her into Qin Muyuan's arms, but would set her on a path of destruction and revenge that would change her life forever. The night Jiang Nuan spent with Qin Muyuan was far more than just a simple encounter. It was an event she would never forget, a moment burned into her, memory like an indelible shadow. She had chosen to meet him because she had no other choice. The cold, calculating CEO was a man whose reputation both repelled and fascinated her. Her mind had closed its eyes to him, but her heart knew there was no other solution. The promise of 300,000 was her only hope of saving her mother. As she faced him, she felt small, insecure, and vulnerable. Qin Muyuan, the man known for his lack of compassion and aloofness, looked at her with a gaze as cold as the winter wind. But Jiang Nuan had chosen to sacrifice her dignity and her soul to get what she needed. Her thoughts were only with her mother, whose life lay in the hands of the doctors. It was a desperate act, a decision that, at that second, seemed like the only way out. The night passed in a mixture of numb pain and inner emptiness. Jiang Nuan was aware that she was giving up on herself, but she couldn't change it. She knew she had to get through this night to get the money she needed, but the more she thought about it, the emptier she felt. It was as if her heart was being crushed by an invisible hand. The man in front of her, Qin Muyuan, didn't seem to really see her, but viewed her only as a means to an end. Everything was just a business to him, another game in his world of power and control. All night long, Jiang Nuan thought only of the money. She focused on what this money would mean for her mother. It was the only thought that kept her alive in this darkness. But deep down, she knew she had lost herself. It wasn't an easy night for her, but a profound experience that wounded her soul. Qin Muyuan had given her nothing more than a superficial encounter. He had used her, and she knew she would never see him again. When the night finally ended, Jiang Nuan felt empty and burned out. She lay in the strange bed, the covers wrapped around her, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts kept circling back to the money. It was the only thing that mattered to her now. She had to get it to save her mother, but the feeling of emptiness she carried inside wouldn't let her go. She felt like she had lost herself, not just saving her mother, but also something of herself. Her life had reached a point where she was willing to do anything to save another person. But when morning broke and the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, it was as if everything changed. Jiang Nuan felt that the pain she felt no longer came from within herself, but from deep within her soul. She felt like an empty shell, going through life. Looking at her own reflection in the mirror was another blow. She could no longer recognize herself, not the woman she once was, but only an exhausted, broken person. The thought of the money she would receive from Qin Muyuan was the only thing that somehow kept her alive. But when she looked at her phone and read a message, she realized that her life was about to take a dramatic turn. The news she received was the blow she never expected. Her mother was dead. Her mother's death hit her like a punch in the gut. She didn't have enough time to save her. All the effort, all the sacrifices, everything she had gone through had been in vain. She hadn't managed to save her life. The news changed everything. The world Jiang Nuan had built shattered in that moment. She knew she would never see her mother again. The promise she had made to herself to save her was in vain. Her life hadn't just changed in the one night she spent with Qin Muyuan. It had been torn apart. At that moment, Jiang Nuan felt more betrayed by the world than ever. She had sold her soul, had given herself to the cold CEO just to save her mother's life, and yet in the end, she was empty and disappointed. Her mother was dead, and the money she would receive was useless. The pain in her heart was not just emotional, but deep and physically palpable. The emptiness inside her was immeasurable, and the thought that she couldn't save her mother tore her apart. But that morning, as she stood in that empty room, staring at the blank message on her phone, she realized something. It wasn't just the loss of her mother that was destroying her. It was the loss of herself. The night she had spent with Qin Muyuan had robbed her not only of her mother, but also of her own dignity and identity. The decision she had made was one she could no longer reverse. But amidst all this pain, she also felt anger rising within her. It was anger at Qin Muyuan, at the world, at everything she had been through. She had lost, but she wasn't ready to simply give up. Deep down, she swore she would take revenge. She would do anything to make Qin Muyuan pay for what he had done to her and her mother. And with this anger, a determination grew within her that she never would have thought possible. Jiang Nuan knew she would never be the same again. But she was willing to do anything to get herself back, and the revenge she sought was the first step. Jiang Nuan stared at her cell phone. The news was so unbearable that for a moment she felt like she couldn't breathe. Her mother was dead. The struggle she'd waged for all those months, the nights she'd worked to earn money to pay for the expensive medication and treatment, all of it had been in vain. It was too late. She'd given everything, only to receive this news in the end. The pain she felt at that moment was more than just grief. It was as if her whole world was collapsing. It felt like a huge boulder had fallen on her heart. She hadn't made it. She had focused so much on the money that she had never considered what this path would mean for herself. Now, after losing her mother, nothing was the same. Everything seemed empty and meaningless. She had lost herself and couldn't bear the pain. There was nothing she did anymore that seemed to have any value. Jiang Nuan felt empty. She had no hope left, no goals. She thought about all the painful nights she had to spend without her mother, all the missed opportunities, all the conversations she would never have again. At that moment, she couldn't help but blame herself. Maybe she could have done something different. Maybe she should have looked for other ways to help her mother instead of taking the path that ultimately only led her to this painful end. The thought that she couldn't save her mother tormented her. But the thought of the emptiness she now felt in her life was even harder to bear. She had sacrificed so much, and now it was all over. It felt as if her life had been derailed forever. The life she had dreamed of, the hope she had held on to for so long, everything was shattered. But just as she was about to be overwhelmed by this wave of grief and despair, she made a discovery that turned her world upside down. While going through her mother's personal files, Jiang Nuan came across an old document that caught her attention. It was a letter her mother had written many years ago, and the contents were something Jiang Nuan would never have expected. The letter was addressed to an unknown man, and as she continued reading, she was overcome by a sense of disbelief. Her mother had had a secret connection with Qin Muyuan in the past, the man she blamed for all her misery. The letter suggested that her mother had had a close relationship with him, a relationship she had never told Jiang Nuan about. The man who was now the cause of her pain and suffering, therefore, had a connection to her mother that she had never known. Jiang Nuan couldn't believe what she was reading. Did her mother really have a secret past with the man she now blamed for the loss of her own life? The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had never suspected that the man she had met in the worst hour of her life was actually connected to her mother in a deeper way than she could have ever imagined. But the discovery didn't stop there. In the letter, her mother also mentioned an important clue that would steer Jiang Nuan in a new direction. It was information she never could have expected. Qin Muyuan not only had a relationship with her mother, but also played a role in her own family's history, a role she now needed to decipher to understand what was really going on. Jiang Nuan stood still, holding the letter in her hand, the weight of this new discovery overwhelming her. She could hardly believe that the life she had believed she had so firmly in her hands still hid so many secrets. The truth about her mother, about Qin Muyuan, and about what had really happened would take a much deeper turn than she could have ever imagined. The pain of losing her mother was still unbearable, but now there was a new spark within her, a determination that drove her to move on. Discovering an old secret had not only shaken her, but also sparked a plan that could help her discover the truth and perhaps even take revenge on the one who had hurt her mother and both of her so deeply. She knew she now had to take a new direction, to put the pieces of her past back together. The path ahead was darker than ever, but also clearer. As she folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, Jiang Nuan knew this moment would change her life forever. The hunt for the truth had only just begun. Jiang Nuan had just come to terms with the loss of her mother, when her life suffered another shocking blow. It was a day like any other, returning to her routine to face her grief and the pain that still tormented her. But then she felt something that rocked her world again. She felt different. Her body was sending her signs she couldn't ignore. Finally, she decided to take a pregnancy test, and what she saw took her breath away. The 2 pink lines on the test were proof of something she never would have expected. Jiang Nuan was pregnant, but it wasn't just any child. It was Qin Muyuan's child. The man she believed was the cause of all her suffering, the man whose cold behavior had destroyed her life, was the father of this child. The realization hit her like a heavy blow. She had put all her hope and energy into saving her mother, and now she found herself in a situation even more complicated and confusing than she could have ever imagined. At first, Jiang Nuan wanted to ward off this thought, not wanting to believe what her own eyes were telling her. But the fact was undeniable. She was pregnant with the child of a man who had used her. The man who had turned her life upside down had now imposed further responsibility on her in a way she had never desired. The rage she felt in that moment was boundless. She felt betrayed and hurt, as if her trust in the world itself had been shattered. Despite everything that had happened, Jiang Nuan vowed to raise the child herself. She had no other choice. It wasn't the child she had wanted, but it was a part of her, and she would make sure it grew up well. She wouldn't let Qin Muyuan or the world that had disappointed her so many times get her down. It was her child, and she would make sure it grew up in a loving and safe environment. She would do what was best for the child, even if that meant ignoring all the wounds that burned inside her. But she couldn't forget what Qin Muyuan had done to her. The pain he had caused her was too great to simply forget. She knew she couldn't forgive him. Instead, she vowed to make him pay for everything he had done to her and her mother. She would find him and do everything she could to show him how much he had destroyed her life. She would make him atone for the inhumanity he had shown her. In the weeks following the shocking discovery, Jiang Nuan tried to organize her thoughts and develop a clear plan. She was determined to get what she was owed. She wouldn't let the man who had driven her mother and herself to the abyss go unpunished. It was a mission she pursued with every fiber of her being. She knew the path she had chosen would be hard and full of obstacles, but she was ready. She had no other choice. She had to get revenge. 5 years passed as Jiang Nuan developed and made her plans. During that time, she worked hard, built her own life, and devoted herself to becoming the woman she was now, strong, determined, and ready to take on any challenge. Her career as a designer had taken her to the next level, and she had made a name for herself in the fashion world. She was no longer the girl who had surrendered herself to a man out of desperation. She was now a woman who knew what she wanted, and nothing could stop her. It was a peaceful return when she finally returned to the land she had left years ago. Her journey had changed her. She was now a woman who knew how to fight for herself. Jiang Nuan had found the courage to return to the world she had once left, and she wasn't willing to stay in the past. She wanted to build a new life for herself, and the first step was to confront Qin Muyuan. She knew he still controlled the company he'd built with his cold-blooded determination. It was the same company where she'd met him 5 years earlier. And now she was ready to face him. She had everything she needed, her skills as a designer, her determination, and the will to defeat him. But as she approached the company, she knew this wouldn't be an easy fight. Qin Muyuan was a man who never lost anything lightly. He was clever, calculating, and always in control. But Jiang Nuan had changed. She was no longer the woman who was helplessly at his mercy. She was a new woman who would no longer allow herself to be manipulated by him. There was no doubt that the coming confrontation would change everything. Jiang Nuan had fought for her place in this world, and she was willing to do anything to get what was coming to her. Her plan was clear. She would free Qin Muyuan of everything he held dear and show him that he was not untouchable. She was ready to fight. Jiang Nuan was back. 5 years had passed since she left this country, with nothing but pain and anger in her heart. Today, however, she stepped back a different woman. She was no longer a desperate young woman willing to do anything for a spark of hope. No, today she was a successful designer, a woman who had fought her way and was no longer afraid of the past. During those 5 years, Jiang Nuan had done everything she could to turn her anger and pain into something positive. She had realized her dream of becoming a fashion designer and launched her own collection, which caused a stir in the industry. Her name was now well known, and her work was respected. But behind this success still burned the desire for revenge. Qin Muyuan had destroyed her life, and she would take everything he loved. Her return was anything but inconspicuous. She knew her first steps into the company, where he still held sway, would be anything but easy. But Jiang Nuan was no longer the naive woman who had once sought refuge in his embrace. She was now confident and ready to face him, unafraid of the consequences. The first step was to blend into Qin Muyuan's world without attracting attention. She applied for a position at his company and, after a brief interview, was hired. Jiang Nuan had used all her skills and charm to find her place in the company, and she was more than willing to put in the hard work necessary to build a reputation. The first few days were tough. She had to prove herself, gain the attention and respect of her colleagues. But Jiang Nuan was a natural when it came to design. Her ideas and vision breathed new life into the company, and she quickly became one of the most promising designers there. But her goal wasn't fame or recognition. Her goal was Qin Muyuan. She wanted to get close to him, make him underestimate her, and then take everything he had, and she succeeded. She knew Qin Muyuan wouldn't take a woman like her seriously, not. After all these years, he wouldn't recognize her. But Jiang Nuan had changed, outwardly and internally. She was now a woman who could no longer be underestimated. Her intelligence, strength, and charisma quickly propelled her to the top, and eventually, she found herself in a room where Qin Muyuan was also a regular. The first time she faced him was a shock. Jiang Nuan had prepared well, but when she looked into his eyes, she felt briefly weak. Qin Muyuan was still the same, icy cold, confident, and with a gaze that could penetrate everything. But she held her ground, even though a storm raged inside her. He had used her then, and now she stood before him, ready to take everything back. He had no idea who she was. To him, she was just a new designer who had earned her place in the company. But Jiang Nuan knew this was the beginning of her game. She was well disguised, but her plan was clear. She would slowly creep into his life, make him feel like she was just another colleague, and then she would strike. The tension between the two grew with each passing day. Jiang Nuan could hardly wait to confront Qin Muyuan, but she knew she had to be patient. Every step she took had to be carefully planned. She allowed no one to distract her and focused solely on her goal: revenge. She met him every day at work. She smiled politely as she passed him, but inside she was seething. She couldn't forget what he had done to her, and every look he gave her reminded her of the injustice she had suffered. But she didn't show it. She knew she always had to stay, one step ahead of him. She wasn't the same woman she used to be. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to show him that he couldn't just forget her. There were moments when she wondered if her revenge would truly bring her the peace she sought. But then she remembered her mother, the pain she had endured, and the grief she had experienced over the past few years. There was no way to undo it all, but she could make Qin Muyuan pay for everything he had done to her and her mother. As the days passed, Jiang Nuan noticed that Qin Muyuan, although he didn't recognize her, kept watching her. Sometimes as she passed by, she felt his gaze on her. It was as if he noticed something about her without knowing exactly what it was. Perhaps it was just an instinctive feeling, but Jiang Nuan knew that soon he would wonder who she really was. And at that moment, she would be ready to reveal everything. She had waited patiently, but the moment of truth was fast approaching. Jiang Nuan knew it wouldn't take long for her to finally show Qin Muyuan that she wasn't the naive young woman he had known back then. She was now a woman with a plan, and she wouldn't let go. Jiang Nuan had worked hard for her place in Qin Muyuan's company. With patience and finesse, she had worked her way up from a simple designer to one of its most important employees. Her goal was to infiltrate the company from within, penetrate every corner of Qin Muyuan's empire, and slowly but surely destroy his world. She had learned how to gain the trust of her employees with the right words and actions. Everyone who met her saw her as a smart, ambitious, and talented designer who was a master of her craft. She could fit into any conversation and was able to gain the trust of her colleagues without appearing suspicious. Everyone thought she was just an ambitious woman who wanted to make the most of her career. But Jiang Nuan's true goal was far greater. She wanted to strike Qin Muyuan, destroy him, and take away what he valued most. She knew she had to take the right steps to bring him down. This required that he not suspect her, but instead view her as a valuable collaborator. Over time, Qin Muyuan also noticed Jiang Nuan. At first, he wasn't particularly impressed. To him, she was just another employee doing her job and of no particular importance. But over time, he became curious. Her ideas, her working methods, and her successes within the company drew his attention. He hadn't forgotten her, but he hadn't really taken her seriously either. But now, it seemed as if he saw her in a different light. Jiang Nuan quickly noticed that he began to treat her differently. He spoke to her more, sought her advice, and valued her opinion. She felt their relationship changing, how he slowly began to see her from a different perspective. But that was exactly what she wanted. It was part of her plan. She had made Qin Muyuan think she was important, without him knowing that one day she would punish him for everything. In the meetings where they often met, she noticed that he behaved differently towards her than he used to. Sometimes he looked at her longer than he did with others, and his gaze betrayed something she knew only too well: interest. But Jiang Nuan knew it wasn't just about her. It was the kind of interest one shows a business partner. Nothing personal. She had to stay vigilant and not be fooled by this attention. She was here for revenge, not to fall in love with him. Despite her determination, Jiang Nuan noticed a growing insecurity within herself. Something had changed. She felt increasingly torn. As she focused on her revenge, she felt an inexplicable connection to Qin Muyuan that she hadn't seen coming. It wasn't love. No, it wasn't. But it was something that confused her and made her mind wander. Maybe it was the power he had. Maybe it was the fact that he treated her in a way she hadn't expected. Maybe it was also the way he kept observing her, as if trying to understand her. Jiang Nuan had been preparing for this moment, the hour of revenge, for years. But now she began to sense that it wasn't just revenge that drove her. She thought, back to the day it all began. The day she'd decided to do anything for her mother, the day she'd entered his world. She'd given everything to survive, and now she was ready to take everything from him. But as she became more and more integrated into his world, something else grew within her. Was it a lack of control? Or was it something she'd never considered? Despite this inner turmoil, she didn't let it distract her. Her revenge would come. She knew it. And it would destroy everything. She would show him that he couldn't just get away with it. But deep down, she couldn't completely free herself from the feelings that were slowly building up inside her. Jiang Nuan knew the first blow against Qin Muyuan was still to come. The moment when she would destroy everything he had built over the years would soon come. She would take everything he held dear. But while she focused on this revenge, she couldn't deny that something else was growing within her, an inexplicable tension that was increasingly troubling her. What if she didn't just want revenge? What if a part of her wanted more? But such thoughts were dangerous, and Jiang Nuan knew she couldn't let them distract her. She had one goal: revenge. And to achieve that, she had to do everything she could to destroy Qin Muyuan. But she couldn't ignore what she'd begun to feel recently. Something about the situation wasn't as simple as she'd always imagined. Qin Muyuan had always known there was something unusual about Jiang Nuan, but he had never truly understood it. Her motives, her determination, everything seemed to lie in a strange dimension he could never fully fathom. But at some point, during a private conversation with one of his closest confidants, the truth came to light. Jiang Nuan wasn't just an ambitious employee. She was the woman he had once betrayed, the woman he had used to achieve his own goals. She was the mother of his child. The shock hit him like a blow. Qin Muyuan couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was as if the world had opened up beneath his feet. This realization surpassed anything he could have ever imagined. Jiang Nuan, the woman he now saw daily at his company, with whom he repeatedly came into contact, was the same woman whose life he had destroyed back then. The same woman he had exploited in a moment of weakness, regardless of the consequences. And now she was standing right in front of him, without him ever having known. Guilt flooded him. It wasn't just the betrayal he'd done to her. It was the knowledge that he'd been part of her pain. The pain she'd carried all these years. The pain that had driven her to do anything to survive. Qin Muyuan knew he'd destroyed her life. That. He'd taken not only her money but also her soul. He couldn't deny it anymore. The moment of realization was a moment of complete collapse for him. He sought her out, wanted to apologize, wanted to tell her how sorry he was. But when he stood face to face with her, he found no words. She looked at him, but her eyes were empty, emotionless. Not a spark of anger, not a spark of forgiveness, just a blank, distant stare that felt like a slap in the face. Jiang Nuan felt anger building up inside her. The years of deprivation, pain, and humiliation all flooded back into her body at that moment. She hadn't waited for Qin Muyuan. She hadn't looked forward to this moment of apology. She had only waited to meet him, to give him what he deserved. But now, as he stood before her, she felt nothing but the distance she had created between herself and him. She had never expected him to apologize, and she had never expected that she could truly hate him. "You've done enough, Qin Muyuan," she said coldly, taking a step back. "Too much." The words hit him like a blow. It was as if she had finally severed the bond between them. Qin Muyuan wanted to apologize again, to do something to right the wrongs he had committed. But Jiang Nuan held him at a distance. Her voice was calm but firm. She didn't want an apology nor remorse. What she wanted was something entirely different, for him to take responsibility for what he had done. "It's too late," she added, without looking at him. "Too late to right the wrong, and I won't allow you to continue to influence my life." Qin Muyuan felt a part of himself breaking. He couldn't deny that he longed for some kind of reconciliation, but Jiang Nuan wasn't the woman he once knew. She was stronger, tougher, and more determined. He could see that she had grown distant from him, that she would never feel the same way again. But what he didn't understand was why she was so cold to him, why she left him so little room for apology. "Why?" he asked, his voice quiet and full of despair. "Why can't you forgive me?" Jiang Nuan took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on him. "Because you didn't understand what you did to me. You destroyed my life, Qin Muyuan. You killed my mother, you took away my trust, and you changed me forever." Her words echoed in the silence between them. "You put yourself above me for your own good, and now you want me to forgive you?" Qin Muyuan felt overwhelmed by her words. It was as if he felt the weight of all those years all at once. But he couldn't ignore her anger. It was justified. And yet, amidst all the guilt he felt, he also felt another emotion that wasn't easy to explain. Had he fallen in love with her? Could that really be the case after he'd destroyed everything? And if so, could it still be saved? He began, but Jiang Nuan interrupted him. "There's nothing you can do, Qin Muyuan," she said calmly. "The time for apologies is over. Now it's all about the consequences." With these words, she turned away and left without another glance at him. Qin Muyuan stood there, unable to take a step. The truth he now knew changed everything, and although he carried remorse in his heart, he knew that the love he felt for her was born of respect and guilt, and perhaps that was precisely why she would never forgive him. The question hung in the air. Can love truly arise from respect and guilt? Will Jiang Nuan ever be able to forgive him? Qin Muyuan knew things wouldn't be easy, but he had no choice but to face the confrontation. He was determined to apologize and explain to Jiang Nuan what had really happened back then. All those years of guilt wouldn't just disappear without him taking action. But when he faced her, he knew words weren't enough. It would take more than an apology to make up for what he'd done to her. "Jiang Nuan," Qin Muyuan began, his voice calm but tinged with deep despair. "I'm sorry. What I did to you was wrong. I used you and put you in a situation you didn't deserve. You were right to hate me. I deserve these feelings of hatred." Jiang Nuan looked at him, her eyes, as always, difficult to read. She was calm, almost cold, but inside her, a storm of emotions raged. She had survived all these years without letting the past overwhelm her, but what Qin Muyuan said made her think. She knew his apology was important, but she had never believed that words alone could heal her wounds. "Why now?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Why are you apologizing now after all these years have passed? Do you think it will give back what you took from me?" Qin Muyuan sighed when he heard her words. "I understand what I did to you, but it's not just about apologizing. It's about recognizing how much pain I've caused. I can't give you back what you've lost, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. Jiang Nuan stood silent for a moment before answering. She hadn't expected his words to roil her feelings so much. It was the truth she never wanted. She had buried the past because she knew she could never return to make up for lost time. But now, as he stood before her, apologizing sincerely, she felt a part of her, a part she had hidden deep inside, falter. You didn't just take away my trust, she said after a long pause. You made me believe I was worthless, that my life didn't matter. And you took my mother away from me, but you also made me stronger. I learned to live without you. And maybe I'm the woman I am now because of all you did to me. Qin Muyuan could hear the bitterness in her voice, but also a strange strength. She was not the woman he had known back then. She was not the fragile Jiang Nuan he had exploited. She was now a woman who had survived her past and learned to grow from her experiences. What do you want from me? She finally asked. What do you expect from me? I don't know what I expect from you, Qin Muyuan said, his voice calm but honest. But I want you to know that I'm willing to do anything to show you that I've changed. I know that's not enough to heal what was between us, but I won't just give up. I will fight for your forgiveness, even if I don't know if you can ever forgive me. Jiang Nuan felt torn at that moment. She had never expected him to stand before her like this. Her feelings for him were complicated. She had never stopped hating him, but she had never completely stopped loving him. It was a paradoxical mixture of pain and longing that tormented her again and again. But she also knew that she couldn't let the past define her. She had managed to live without him, and she would continue to do so no matter what he said now. Maybe there are things that can't be forgiven, she finally said, but that doesn't mean I depend on you. I built my life without you. You left me when I needed you most, and now I'm here, without you, without your help. Qin Muyuan could hear the determination in her words, but he knew it wasn't over yet. It wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something new. Maybe it wasn't the reconciliation he had hoped for, but it was a chance to prove himself. A chance to show that he wasn't the man he had been back then. I know I don't deserve to ask for your forgiveness, he said, but I won't give up. I'll show that I've changed, that I can be the man you deserve. Jiang Nuan looked at him, her eyes undecided. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew she had become stronger in this confrontation. She hadn't let him discourage her. She hadn't let him control her. And perhaps that was the true victory she took from this moment. But how? Would her story continue? Could she truly break away from her past and forge a new path? At that moment, Jiang Nuan knew she still had many answers to seek, but she also knew she would find those answers for herself. Jiang Nuan's story shows us that true strength is often born from the most dire adversity. Revenge can be liberating, but it is not the only path to healing and peace. In the end, it is the decision to recognize one's own worth and not give up that changes everything. What would you have done in Jiang Nuan's place? Do you think Qin Muyuan has really changed, or is it too late? Share your thoughts in the comments. The best comment will be pinned.